So I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign. And we're very, very pleased to welcome Svitlana Romanko. Svitlana has been an environmental lawyer for over 20 years, and she holds a PhD in environmental, natural resources, land, and agrarian law, and a doctorate on climate change law, climate governance, and climate policy. I think really that the best introduction that I could give to Svitlana is with this short video of Svitlana at the COP27 conference.
I just said them exactly as following. You are a terrorist state and you are genociding, torturing and killing us daily for 9 months. Your oil and gas is killing us. You are guilty in a war crimes, in a climate crisis, environmental crisis, and you should not be here, but in front of the International War Crimes Tribunal. And then other activists started to stood up and they shouted that Russia is guilty in war crimes, and they shouted how despicable they are, and until we all have been removed from this official Russian side event. Also, just to highlight the importance of why this event exactly, because Russian delegation was present in big numbers, but we have never seen them attending public spaces or communicating. And this was only one and only official Russian side event where we wanted to use our freedom of speaking and freedom of attending public gathering to confront people who came from the country which is in open war and broke all international laws, and in particular rule of law principle, destroying our environment hugely and destroying our people and destroying in a way of just half of territory of Ukraine right now. And for me it also was a very symbolic fight, and no regret related to that at all, because facing and confronting Russia, I in a way confronted any injustice on the planet, any dictatorships which are fueled by fossil fuels and which use their revenues to wage their war and conflicts against it. Also think of us activists today, earlier, and also activists in Uganda and Tanzania who were multiple times detained for the ECOP opposition, and also Mozambique and across African countries and in many other countries where dictatorships are alive and well. And they all are locked in prison for speaking out, and people must have the right to stand up and speak out for freedom, democracy and climate justice. And good morning, everyone. I know that it's morning in the US, and thank you so much for attending this morning forum. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate every single gesture of solidarity with Ukraine in this very tough period of our life. And I see some questions about clarification, but I can get back to them later after I will finish speaking. And I have to say that this outrageous war is lasting over 10 months already, and every day of the war is just full of a huge suffering and death and destruction, which we could never imagine living in a peaceful country and democratic country. And it's really awful to know, because even during Christmas, I had just sharing some personal stories. We in my regional center, each day we have funerals and memorial services for those who came back home dead and killed by Russian troops on the east and south, and among them are, as you know, are almost children, 18, 19, 20 years old, some sons and daughters. And even now, my friend, a good artist, and his son is missing after the Bakhmut fight. and the whole community is trying to help and support this family. But these families are too many, as you know, are millions and millions and millions. And what I see when I speak about this war for the first time, I see the blood of Ukrainians, of my compatriots, of the people who lived their peaceful lives and hoped for a better future for them and their children, which will never be true. Just speaking, I mean, since Russia is attacking us, and they continue doing that, and starting from my background, just to bring us to my background, why I'm here, what I'm speaking about, interconnections between the fossil fuels, climate crisis, and also dictatorships and Putinism, as my good friend Bill McKibben told that. He named me as a main spokesperson for connections between this war and Putinism and fossil fuels. Well, and I've been working for a climate movement for many years, for 9 years already. And I started as a grassroots activist with my first campaign against the shale gas exploration in the western part of Ukraine, almost near where I lived. And I confronted the head of Chevron, who came to my area to introduce a public hearings of how well shale gas development will be for local communities. But at that time, I was an international expert at the university, and I did a strategic environment impact assessment of the shale gas exploration. And we found out suddenly with many partners, among them there was a cabinet of ministers of Ukraine and University of Colorado and UNEP and many others who were in charge of this research. I was just an expert involved into that, and we found out that 65 amendments need to be made to the national legislation, and they will all worsen the rights of local communities, and they will deepen the climate crisis. It was over a decade ago, and next day when I found out about this, when we finished our work, and I've been to this public hearing, I came to media, and we started grassroots campaign against Chevron, and we won over them. They never explored for shale gas in our area. And later there was a revolution of dignity where I also participated. And also after that, from grassroots activism and pro bono advocating for human rights, I became, I started working for 350.org. I've been with them for 5 years, and I've been building climate movement across 14 countries of the region of Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia, Russia included. But we were not able to work in Russia that much back to then. But I know Russia very well. I know what civil society was like and what are they doing now, because we had many connections. We tried to grow some activism there, but it's not, as you see, with a huge propaganda and these dictatorships that are really is the largest in the world, built on the blood and fossil fuels. We can't do much to waking up the civil society. So we need to act fast still. And after that, I've been working for Laudato Si movement as global campaign manager for zero fossil fuel campaigns, including carbon bombs campaigns, including also a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty and others. So I work basically with all countries, all regions, US included, and global South included. So I know that Tanzania is not a dictatorship, but still Uganda and Tanzania are very much oppressing their citizens and detaining them. We know it quite well, detaining them for the ECOP campaign and for protecting environment, where the Eastern African crude oil pipeline, which is huge, but we hope it will be still canceled. So it's all the whole picture for me. And when the war started, I've been working for Laudato Si movement, but I could not, just the very first day of the war, I started to organize as an organizer, as a campaigner, started organize for the Stand With Ukraine campaign, which became a global framework. And we've been able, with many campaigners from different countries, with Ukraine as well, 45 Ukrainian networks, organizations, many of them, and actually Nobel laureate Alexandra Matviichuk, I also involved into this campaign, many many people, and we worked together to end all investments into Russian fossil fuels and to embargo all Russian oil, gas, and coal to end the war, because interconnection between the fossil fuels and the war have been very, very explicit for us since the very first day. And we launched the full-scale campaign on March the 4th. And we published our press release with a very, very sharp quotes, very heavy quotes. We were able to get it in Russian media, and the next day after we published this press release, just Putin has adopted this law about 15 years of imprisonment for those journalists and media who will actually just publish the things about the war. But we were able to get our press release and to deliver the kind of truth, just at least try to deliver truth to those people. And yeah, so that's how we started. And we started and there were over 850 organizations, big and small, mostly of course international, but also many local and regional organizations from 60 countries of the world who stepped in solidarity with the Stand With Ukraine campaign. And we've been campaigning for embargo on Russian oil, gas, and coal. It was not easy, because as we know, Europe especially was highly dependent on Russian fossil fuels, and the Western companies courted Putin for years, and Western governments courted Putin as well for years, providing him all opportunities to enrich himself and to build his reign of power based on oil, gas, and coal, on these enormous resources. Because just to remind one small thing, that Russia still hold it before the war, the second place in the world on the crude oil supply, and the third place on the gas supply. They are basically the largest dictatorship with the largest reserves of oil and gas especially. And but there are others who are watching them, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and others, and Iran. We can see all of them. We can see them isolated in some ways as Iran from international collaboration and embargoed, but still they're able to supply drones that hugely destroyed Ukrainian energy infrastructure. As of December, we got 40% of our infrastructure destroyed. And in my area, in the city where I live, there is a big power plant, coal power plant. We were fighting against it because it's owned by oligarchs. It's extremely dirty. They are very close. They never even let the state monitoring in and to see what's happening, and they never disclose the emissions that they've been producing. But now a part of this power plant, there's been multiple times a stroke by missiles and by drones, so it's not functional anymore. So we have power cuts, as you see, and in many areas. But yes, there are different sides of the problem. But I would like I think it's now time, after I introduced myself, just to give you more understanding why I am in this fight and why I'm speaking to you, because this campaign that I led, the Stand With Ukraine, was able to, it was exactly the thing that global campaigners and many organizations were waiting for the call from Ukraine to step in and to fight against the fossil fueled war. And they did it so great in solidarity. We've got many campaigns. We've got many people massive gatherings and protests. For example, if to describe what we had back to then, so Fridays for Future united all youth movements, and they were organizing tirelessly mass protests before each European Council summit to pressure on them on the streets. With many other organizations, many others. These were hundreds of organizations to make a pressure on the European decision makers to impose embargo. And we know that this embargo was imposed, and it was really fast. And given especially, no, we are not satisfied with the pace how they imposed embargo. And I spent all autumn traveling to almost all autumn to Brussels, speaking to Germany, speaking to Bundestag, to many political power holders, and try to persuade them that these should be done much, much faster. And in Germany, explicitly, their politicians told me, yes, we know. And if we could do that back to April, of course, our economy industry would have collapsed. I said, yes, but we would have at least have a chance to end this war much sooner and save millions of our people, millions of those who fled and those who died, who violated, who tortured, who killed and dead. And actually, just giving one small fact into this picture, what would have happened if back to April 2022, we would have had an embargo on Russian oil and gas completely imposed? German economy, the major of the European Union, would experience just a very small, up to from 0.3 up to 3% GDP decline annually. But now our Ukrainian economy is experiencing a decline from 35 to 60% right now because of understandable reasons, because no country in the world can be resilient to these constant attacks and destructions and that are happening. But now I think it's time to, I am monitoring time, but I think it will be really good for you to show for me to show you and some visuals of what I'm saying and what we've been able to achieve so far, and just to bring more what's going to happen next, and where we are seeking for your solidarity and for your stepping in and for your willpower to help us to reach out to US policymakers, to make enough pressure on them. Because we know that the elections were quite tough, but they are not that bad. And we are very happy about that here from Ukraine, that we can keep some kind of a good collaboration with between governments. But we are on the other level. We are on the level on the civil society and solidarity level, and I believe we can do much more all together. So the main goal for me speaking to you is just really ask you for solidarity in these tough times, because war raging on, and we should know that it's not over, and we need much more efforts than ever to end this finally. But if we will end this, it will be the most huge win that we could ever imagine, and it could save the whole nation and many other nations who are suffering as well from the war. Not that explicitly like we do, but multiple crises. Of course, this is not just a word, and we know that many people are experiencing the food crisis, the energy, poverty crises, and cost of living crisis, and many others. So we are on the same boat, and I'm not even saying about a climate crisis and fossil fuel dependency and addiction that made this war happen. Well, now it's time for me to start, and I will start with this, my so-called official presentation, which I am very happy to share with you. Just 1 second, I will fix these technical issues to enable doing that. Yes, just to, yes, can you see, John, can you see my screen?
Well, we're seeing your screen, but it's just black.
Oh, yes.
We saw it for 1 second, and then
it says loading. It says loading.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay. All right.
Yes.
We see it now.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. That's great. That everything is working, and that's perfect. So. Yes, I am with you here as well in the capacity of the founder and director of Razom We Stand, which is international, based in Ukraine organization calling for a total and permanent embargo on Russian fossil fuels and immediate end to all investment into Russian oil, gas, and coal. Still, it's a successor of the Stand with Ukraine campaign that I organized for and launched, and I talked about the Stand with Ukraine campaign. And these many organizations
which acted with us in solidarity in many countries, which really makes me happy and being able to move forward as many campaigners in Ukraine when we just witness this solidarity. And Stand with Ukraine, this is what you see, the picture on your left. This is our banner, which traveled with me to COP27, which I aimed to roll on, just standing in these in front of these Russian ministers in Russian event, but I was not allowed by security services of Egypt and UN police to take it in, but still you can see it there. But we had multiple actions even during COP and in Europe, across Europe. So this banner has seen the world so far, and we believe it made a difference as well as we do. So we act to push for fossil fuel phase out in general, because as I said, we interconnect this war caused by the largest fossil fuel dictatorship in the world. We call it a fossil fueled war, and we are looking for a bold climate and anti-conflict and action in main political spaces and countries. And I currently collaborate with many other organizations in the global south and in African countries, in other countries of Latin America, to work against the fossil dictatorships in there where they are as well, because we truly believe that the fight of Ukrainian people for freedom could lead us to what scientists told us we must do: to stop burning oil, gas, and coal and tackle the climate crisis. So we also are promoting a clean energy revolution. Yes, we are that kind of revolution. We don't want to wait. We want this revolution to happen now in parallel, when we are trying to speak about the green recovery of Ukraine. You will see a few slides afterwards in the presentation. But I truly believe that before we will start rebuilding, we need to end this war, and we need to win over Putin and this evil. And we need also to escalate the clean energy transition and global push for renewables. This is already happening, because the more we pressure on the governments and industry in the European Union, in the US, in Canada, in France, in Italy, because in Germany we have some target countries, the more we pressure for them to stop and phase out fossil fuels and stop paying Russia especially. So the more they are looking into the renewable energy transition, because they understand the connection that renewable energy is a freedom of peace and I mean community-owned distributed energy. Of course, not another monopoly. We're not looking for that. Just replace one with another community-owned small renewable energy generation, which will make us truly independent and resilient in the face of fossil fuel revenues and dictatorships that build their political power on these revenues from fossil fuels when they own. And established politically represented ambitious green recovery plan of Ukraine that can catalyze the global momentum for change, because we believe that Ukraine, after it will be rebuilt from the war ashes, it could become a global showcase for the green energy transition. And for that purpose, we involved Amory Lowins, who is Einstein of energy efficiency, as you know, and he works with us for outlining the steps how Ukraine can rebuild in green. And of course, internally in the country, we don't want to use this moment with the political elites and just don't let them to build the countries that we will repeat an old order with a huge energy demand and huge fossil fuel supply and demand as well, with corruption, with a lot of unfinished democratic transformations and reforms. We don't want this country, because we believe that we deserve our right to be rebuilt in green with renewable powers that don't kill anyone. And we are networking and engaging the movement and connecting many organizations and networks. We do live campaigning. We try to fulfill also the needs of our partners, trying to push on their governments, as for example Canada, to stop their tar sands production, and to the US to stop the expansion, especially on pipelines, and we think we do it well, especially in terms of strategic comms. And here we can see that the main message of the campaign has been that Russian war machine has been funded and fueled by the coal, oil, and gas industries from Russia. We know them, and we confronted them directly and openly. Gazprom, Rosneft, Transneft, Lukoil, many others. They are having bad times because we are confronting them in many countries publicly, tagging into Twitter, and also protesting against them and their partners. And currently we get some win. I will show you just in a second. It was not easy to get, but we won over Total Energies because we made a systematic pressure on the Total Energies, who are evil everywhere. Because they are just the oil major who really does not want to respect the climate crisis and human rights. So they just announced in December, after our campaigning and after we filed the case to the French prosecutor on the war crimes and terrorism against them with some partners from France, as after we organized a few protest actions starting from May, the shareholder gathering in Paris, which we and our partners blocked, and we didn't let this happen. So they announced that they are cutting ties with Russian gas company Novatek. Before that, they were saying, no, we can't live without Russian gas. But now they announced that it would take the billions of write-off on its stake in Russian group Novatek and withdraw 2 members from the company's board. So that's the only one example. Change is not happening fast, especially when the fossil fuel lobbyists were able to really build their power for years. And existing political and economic systems grounded in fossil fuel addiction have enabled deep social and climate crises that have proliferated conflict and wars and fueled by revenues from fossil fuels. And I truly believe that the system of oppression must be dismantled, and we are those who will dismantle this system forever. And but I just checked before we spoke, I just checked how much Europe sent to Russia and to Putin since the war started. And this number is 134 plus, like it's over 134 billion of euros. And this number is growing. They are still buying Russian oil, especially in kind of until the seaborne oil embargo is enforced since January the 5th. And Russia tries to find the ways to import the oil with the hidden vessels and so on. But we are demanding the secondary sanctions, and we will get those, I mean, an insurance on the registration of those vessels across the European Union, and we will try to cut from that side. But even in the US, just giving you a brief understanding of what's happening in the US is a major investor in the Russian fossil fuels, and currently there are, as our partners found out in their database, our partners Lingo, there are 124 plus US financial institutions and as pension funds and others who keep billions in Russian fossil fuels, and they say they can't get them out because the stocks are not working, but we don't believe them they can, and they must to end funding the Putin's war machine, and we demand this from them as well. And Putin still spends 900 million euros per day to keep the war raging on, but I've actually seen at least 3 reports, one of which is leaked from the Russian side, that are saying, and they are proving, that Russian economy is collapsing, and it will collapse just for this year in 30% of their GDP decline, which is huge for Russia. And we are getting to where we want to be. We are cutting them of financial supply and financial support, and we need to go on and to keep doing that. And so this is a number as well. A number of 87% of Europeans want massive investments in renewable energy. We all want it, but do the politicians and some governments want it? It's not so easy, I would say. now I would like to zoom in because I'm mindful of time as well, what we have. And I just want you to zoom in what destruction in just to see these numbers. Please look into the screen and see. And these numbers are now much higher because it says as end of December. So more than 60% of missile strikes and 97% of all targets that Russian army targeted with their missiles and bombs were civilian facilities. Can you imagine that? They just precisely to target civilian facilities, maternity hospitals, schools, universities, and in our cities, which I loved visited so much Kharkiv, and all other cities on the east. There is nothing left. And do you remember this Mariupol theater, which has been hardly bombarded? And we accused actually Total for supplying kerosene for Russian warplanes, which was actually, you saw them writing off. So it was proved by the partners in the report. So it was really an accusation based on fact, and this theater has been destroyed with Russian army just specifically to hide the proofs and to hide the evidence of the crimes that they are committing. And now this number is much higher at energy infrastructure facilities, and this is very true that people in Ukraine don't have access to energy supply, to water, to heating of their houses, and I don't know how would we. And when you want to walk in my city, for example, which is not on the very front line, but it's all the time dark and people are staying at their homes and only generators on diesel are working in these small shops and small businesses that are trying to stay afloat. But for how long they will be able to do that? So you see the destruction is huge and many millions of people fled the country. We have a lot of internally displaced people. We have infrastructure destroyed, and the deficit of system is so high in power supply. But before the start of full invasion, we had enormous growth in renewable energy, and our government was even thinking to limit it somehow because it was too fast and they did not have absorbing capacity for that. But and we demonstrated record levels, as this slide says, for key indicators. And we were on a good track as well with the second national determined contribution. So we were aiming to cut our emissions and join the European Green Deal. I believe we will still be joining the European Union and the European Green Deal, but the prices we are paying for that, it's awful. And it's not acceptable at all. And here are some economic data just to understand where we are, and it's really hard. Most of people are in their poverty, not just energy poverty, because half of the country is experiencing energy poverty, but in the poverty itself, they are losing their means for living and their jobs. And this is huge. Inflation is huge, and the total damage to physical infrastructure was estimated at 600 billion euros. But I think these numbers are not true. These are much higher since the time flies and the destruction mounts. And there are some money committed to rebuild the country, but it's still not enough for fulfilling these promises and provide people some immediate relief and help. So here, you just very briefly what we've done, just in pictures. We've done much more than that, but we installed this huge banner. It was really huge. You can see the scale, me standing in front of this banner, and we've been having this in front of the European Parliament in Brussels for 2 days, saying stop buying fossil fuels and end the war. And after that, we've got some secondary sanctions and embargo on oil confirmed, and the bank campaign, which our partners had helped us, which ended with Citigroup banks coming the next day after our actions and after our open letters and our op-eds. They just said that they will wind up the commercial credits in Russia. It's not enough, of course, but we are pressuring them to and all financial support for Russians as well. You have seen this right now. I won't repeat it. And actually, interconnection of the war and sustainable development goals, if I may say that, because I've been a co-author of the report Fueling Our Future, which has been presented during Stockholm Plus 50. And this report is public. I can share a link with you where I made the connections between the war and sustainable development goals. And we are much behind of achieving those goals. And with the war and fossil fuels, we will be not being able to tackle the conflict, and also with the industry which is making the killing on the huge prices. They were doing it all war basically, and now we started demand them to send all this dirty money, blood money, to rebuild Ukraine, which they made on Russia. Total even promised, you see me on the right, Total is even promised that they will do that. And challenging. So just more back what we did in COP, we tried to get more people in and try to persuade more people to help us with moving for the full embargo on Russian oil and gas. But not only Russian oil and gas, it's a primary goal, but what we would like to envision, and what we envision, the free energy system that serve all people. And in the parallel, we are just pushing for phasing out all fossil fuels, and not neo-colonialize African countries or other countries looking for a cheap gas to keep the economy running for Germany or for other countries. It's not appropriate. It cannot happen when we witness this awful war, and we don't want the fossil fuel status quo to be unlimitedly continued and being able to affect many other nations. And we've made an agreement with the members of the European Committee of Regions, who are official representatives of different European cities. And now we try to build the connections between cities, people, to help to relieve what is happening, and to help to end the war from their side, and to help cities rebuild. And we made some conversations with the US Bureau of Energy, and they committed to help us in fighting fossil fuels as well, and participate. So I don't know if I should go. I see many questions. Maybe I just will say that here is the high-profile event in Berlin. I attended with a few civil society members, but it was not easy for us to attend such a high-profile event. We just got our registration approved just before the event itself, because we organized a press conference, and the government reacted and approved our registration and let us in. But the more we are present and disruptive in these high-profile political spaces, the more we have a chance to talk to politicians directly, the more we can make an impact as well. Before, in the very morning, we organized an action with the projection saying build peace in Europe and fossil fuels and rebuild Ukraine green. What we are going to how other support can help us achieve much more. So first of all, we want to build involvement in the global movement to end the fossil fuel era and wartime mobilization to revamp energy transition globally. We plan to double pressure on the US, EU, and G7 governments and G20 governments. And we know that this year, India is chairing the presidency of G7. And if we would like to effectively enforce the global energy sanctions against Russia to reduce global fossil fuel supply and demand, including China, India, and South Korea, which are the biggest importers, which are non-US based and not EU based. And we aim to forge a powerful and compelling green revolution pathway for recovery of Ukraine's economy and make it a global showcase. And these are details which I believe I probably would not just share these details. You will have this presentation at your hand. I will send it to you afterwards. It's open, but also there is a huge proven potential for Ukraine to become a green, inclusive economy and produce a lot of wind and solar power, especially offshore wind and it could cover the most part of Ukrainian need and demand and we could also import it after the war ends. And these are 4 transformations, how we see our future with hope. And we would like to, as I said, completely dismantle the political systems that enabled the Putin build of power and his military built up for many years. And these kind of economies, the mono economies based mainly on the revenues from fossil fuels, and Russia, as Russian economy was, 40% of their federal budget is based on revenues from fossil fuels, and also 60% of the profit in general is from fossil fuels. So that's not acceptable in the modern world, and we need to change this dynamic significantly. And what we thought what could happen afterwards, when we isolate Russia completely from the global markets, we envisioned that no one else is taking Russia's share in fossil fuels. We just cut them, and we phase out fossil fuels, starting from Russia, the biggest one, and then gradually we do it to all fossil fuel dictatorship, because we will decrease demand and we will just escalate the renewable energy transition everywhere, and we will empower people to being able to feeling independent and build their own renewable energy smart grids, and not being dependent on a state renewable policies, or so far just being a producers of clean energies that will make us all free. And of course, this is our details. Right now we will need to rebuild, and what we are, and rebuilding is already happening. It's just cynic, but it's happening. It's live, because I often get questions how you can and many of us from Ukraine, how you can even discuss about rebuilding, green rebuilding, as the war is so dreadful, and the consequences, and we don't know when it ends. And we say we wanted this war to be ended in 3 months when we started campaigning, but we just see that it's not happening. Unfortunately, it's not happening overnight, but we are very close to that as all democratic societies, and we are very close to capture this historical moment and to break free from the fossil fuel addiction. And the feedback I've got, that the EU completely, the main addicted to the fossil fuels, to cheap Russian gas. They build basically their economy on this gas and on oil as well, and they build their economic power in that. But even they are completely recognizing the need to switch to renewable energies. And Germany now celebrates that they are 0% dependent on Russian oil, gas, and coal as of beginning of this year. I just only have one question for them. For me, 1 year is not that fast. They could do much better, much faster, and help us much more than they did to end this war, because they were a main barrier to embargo in many, many senses. And so these are all good things when we will build, when we will end the war, as a path to resilient society, circular economy, improving quality of life, including environmental quality of life, of course. And we need huge investments in green infrastructure and deploy innovation. So the other part of what we are doing across US, and we will be doing this year, it's just speaking to US government officials and also some think tanks to help us to create a Marshall Plan, so-called Marshall Plan for Ukraine, and to help us to divert investments from the fossil fuels, especially Russian fossil fuels, and to use frozen Russian assets to rebuild Ukrainian green. This is our primary task when we will be able to isolate them financially. And this is, of course, this won't happen if we don't create and cause a paradigm shift from large-scale centralized conventional power generation towards a flexible, renewable-based, distributed and decentralized energy systems that serves all people, and two-directional flows of energy and data. and this must happen as well now. These are some, I won't stop here now. Of course, the destruction is huge, and now I guess the destruction caused by Russia to all Ukrainians is much higher than 1.5 trillion of US dollar equivalent, but to rebuild, we will need much more. Thank you so much for your attention and for your patience, and try to really do my best to talk to you. But of course, if I did not cover the things or questions you are interested in, you are very welcome to ask quite clarifying questions, and I'm really happy to hear your feedback and your any things you would like to add. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much, Svitlana. So we'll now have further discussion, questions, comments. And I see Marianne has raised her hand. So go ahead, Marianne, and then Ted.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm in Canada. I'm a climate justice activist in Canada, and I'm wondering if you have any comments on Canadian investment in Russian oil and gas, and whether there's any specific actions that we could do in Canada. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Marianne. So Ted, and then Stan. So Svitlana, we'll just take a few more questions and comments, and then if you could keep track of them, and then you can answer them together, please.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Thank you.
So Ted, did you have your hand up?
I did. I put it down.
Okay.
In anticipation.
Okay. Stanley?
So I'm still sorry. I did have
okay. You still wanted to speak. Okay.
So first of all, thank you, Svitlana. It was very interesting, and also we appreciate your courage in this situation. I have one question and a comment. I think in the chat, somebody talked about the United States. It's true, this is my comment, the United States fossil fuel industries love the war, and they want it to be prolonged. They don't want Ukraine to win. They mostly want to prolong the current situation. Because if Ukraine wins and Russian oil and gas comes back the way it was before, it's not good for US fossil fuel producers. This also goes for Canada. What they would like is to increase their share of the world market and keep that new share, which means following the war, they want Russia to be open to US investment, Canadian investment, but they also want to continue fracking in the United States and Canada, which means keeping market share. So I think the comment in the chat was only partly true. That most of the oil industry supports oil and natural gas industry in the United States, supports giving defensive weapons to Ukraine, but not giving offensive weapons. Their policy is prolong the misery, keep the profits rolling. Okay, and that's my comment. And my question, Svitlana, is the one thing you did not mention about the energy transition you're promoting, which is a very important source of electrical generation in Ukraine, is nuclear. So what I would like to know is, how do you see nuclear energy as part of this transition?
Okay. Thank you, Ted. Stanley, and then Mudassar.
I want to mention a campaign this group started to stop the import of the import into the US of Russian uranium. Europe, and especially Germany, is making an effort to stop using Russian oil and natural gas. But at the same time, there's no restrictions for US companies buying and importing Russian uranium. We started an online petition to ban these imports. If John or Cheryl could share the picture illustrating the effort.
I don't have it handy right now, Stanley. So
Okay. at any rate, note, we're not calling for US uranium to replace Russian uranium. We want to get nuclear power phased out. In fact, we heard about all this from Greenpeace. So this works on two fronts. The old phrase is kill two birds with one stone, but I prefer we want to feed two birds with one petition. I'll put the link to the petition in the chat. And if folks want to work on this with us, I will put my email and you can contact me on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Stanley. Mudassar?
Hi all, it's Mudassir, and it was a very excellent presentation by Svitlana ma'am basically. So my first question is going to be, Ukraine is already on the verge of using, like, what do you say, that natural sources of energy, because I was seeing left-wing military videos and they are using solar energy. That's the thing. But how are you going to stop Russia? Because Russia is a big country and many big players will be involved. No, okay, Total had promised like they are not going to use petrol and all, but how worthy are Total's promises? Because when I was seeing a documentary on Al Jazeera some 3-4 months back, they generally don't tolerate dissent and things like that, and many activists they executed. Like, how is that going to work out? And last and the least point is, how is Ukraine on the environmental scale? Is it good or is it bad, or is it like just the quote unquote developing world? And that's the only point. Thank you.
Thanks, Mudassar. Linda?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm from Minneapolis, and we have a pitched battle going on in our part of the country against fracking and other things that destroy the water supply, especially for the Native Americans that or the indigenous people that live on a lot of the land that's been seized by these oil companies. But so a more personal thing came to mind listening to you. About 10 years ago, my dad lived in Western Colorado, and they were beginning to lose a significant amount of their equity and land values because of the fracking industry, which was just, like Colorado's a semi-arid place without a ton of water. And I was just looking on the computer about the Colorado River. I'm not really sure if I mean, it's in danger too. I'm not sure if that's from fracking or not, but I think one of the last things he was involved with before he died was fighting the fracking companies. No, that's just my comment.
Thanks, Linda. I have a couple points I'd like to raise. Oh, I see Ken is here. And I'm very glad to see you here, Ken, because one of the points I was going to raise, which maybe Ken would like to comment on also, Svitlana, you mentioned Total Energy, and Total is one of the main backers of the coup in Myanmar. So I think it's important. I'm guessing that Ken might want to comment on that a little bit further. Also, I wanted to make one point about the seizure of assets of the Russian oligarchs, and it seems to me that those assets, as well as Ukrainian oligarchs, that the real assets, which are their investment in real estate, that's what should be seized. But then we have to go further, and this is where I think that it ties in with the issue of the fossil fuel industry. Is I think the assets of the war profiteers should also be seized, which means first and foremost the oil companies, and that's where I think it is directly tied in with a lot of what, as I understand it, what Svitlana is campaigning around. Also, I'm not sure I understood Ted correctly on what he was saying about the US wanting to prolong the war, but I wouldn't really see it that way. I think that the main concern of the US, they don't want to see Russia expand its power, but also they don't want, they're very, very concerned about not getting into a direct confrontation with Russia. But I don't think that I see you, Ted, but I don't think that they want, I mean, this war is, among other things, it's creating great political problems here in the United States. So anyway, oh, the last thing, Svitlana, that I wanted to mention is if you could put us in contact with any environmental groups here in the United States or in Canada for that matter, that, you know, we've got some plans for some different public actions to support Ukraine in the coming few weeks. And if you could put us in contact with any environmental groups here that might be interested in working with us on that, that would be very much appreciated. So with that, Ken, and then Cheryl, and then Ted, if you want to come in right after that, you know, that's okay, or maybe we could, anyway, maybe pretty soon we could have Svitlana comment on what's being said. Go ahead, Ken.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you for the presentation. When I listen to the presentation, I feel as if she's talking about my own struggle for Burma's liberation from military dictatorship. Russian invasion to Ukraine and calling for war is not just limited to Ukraine. I just would like to point that out. The weapon the Burmese military is using is supported by Russian government. These two men, you know, in February 2021, Burmese military dictator Min Aung took military coup, and next year, 2022, February, Putin declared war to Ukraine. These two events really shook up, you know, a lot of economic crisis and inflation and environmental crisis in Southeast Asian area as well. And Burma is the only country in ASEAN openly supported Russia for invading Ukraine. And we also have similar problem when we try to sanction Myanmar oil and gas enterprise, MOGE, because that fund that military generated working with Chevron and Total is, you know, buying weapons from that fund, killing, like the presentation just mentioned, bombing hospital, elementary school. So, and also in the UN Security Council, because of Russian and China stance, we cannot establish no flying zone in Burma. And currently, we were able to pass NDAA with the section of Burma Act, but the United States government left out to sanction for MOGE and these wide trading things. And currently, I feel like the war also are not in support of limiting the, you know, output of the wide trading and these, you know, gas trading. In Japan relies on a lot of oil from Russia and India as well. So in this kind of situation, my question actually for everyone is, how can we go about, you know, like sanctioning these kind of big company, establishing a no-fly zone to really protect a very vulnerable population like children and citizens of the country. So that what I would like to comment, and also get help from all of you if you have any answer for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken. Cheryl?
Yeah, first off, I apologize for being late. I really thought the meeting started at 8, so I don't know what I missed. So I have sort of 3 comments and maybe 1 or 2 questions. The first off is so when we were organizing for this meeting, one of our goals was to try to reach out to the environmental activists, climate change activists in the United States. Because for us, the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign, the fight to be in solidarity with Ukraine and for a victory in Ukraine is obviously, as Svitlana has been pointing out, completely linked up with the environmental crises and climate change. But I think, as everybody here is aware of, there is a big division within the left and all the different parts of the left around the world, but maybe even especially here in the United States, where it's been a lonely battle to talk about and to fight for international solidarity with Ukraine. So I guess my question for you, Svitlana, is what is your impression about the world environmental movement and climate change activists when it comes to Ukraine? Do they understand the need to be in solidarity with Ukraine? Because, as John said, we would very much like to be working with people on this, and we may not agree on everything, and that's okay. But if we agree on that, that's very important. So that's my first question. The second one has to do with sanctions and embargoes. That is a very, very big topic. And actually, we're planning on having a forum or something about that very soon in the future, because so just one example, I think in the news recently, it's been, we've learned that there are many components that make up the Iranian drones that are being used to murder people, commit genocide in Ukraine, are made up of components from the United States. And yet there are sanctions against Iran. So there are so many loopholes in the sanctions. And I'm guessing the same thing is true with embargoes. I'm not an expert on these things. I haven't studied it. But my impression, and I think the impression of many people, especially when you learn about things like that, like, really? So what is the power of these sanctions to change anything, and also embargoes? So if you could talk a little bit more about that. I mean, I'm not saying it's not an important tool, but really, as soon as a sanction is put in place, somebody's looking for a way to get around it. So it's completely powerless. I guess my last comment, and it's really kind of related to Ken's comment, which is, we are all very atomized in our different groupings, those of us that want to change the world. For myself, I've been a socialist since I was a teenager. And at the very least, I feel like the thing that links us is in opposition to the capitalist system, which really is what is the engine behind the destruction of the climate and the war in Ukraine and all of that. But so to me, this is our ultimate goal, is at the very least to try to be united in what kind of a world we want to live in. Again, a world that is free of fossil fuels and has a future for human beings and nature.
Thank you, Cheryl. Ted?
Okay, just to clarify what I said, John, that confused you. I did not say the ruling class in the United States just wants to prolong the war. The ruling class in the United States is divided. An important sector of it supports giving Ukraine defensive weapons and not offensive weapons. And that includes most of the fossil fuel companies. And I believe they have self-interest, especially those who don't have investments in Russia, whose central investments are in domestic fracking. That sector wants to prolong the war, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Svitlana, would you like to comment and answer any questions or
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for questions. And I will start from the first one about how you can get involved and act against the investments into Russian fossil fuels in Canada and in petrostate itself as well. I know I worked in Canada with my colleagues from Laudato Si movement, so it's not easy at all. But there are a few financial institutions that keep funding and keep providing some financial services for Russian fossil fuel companies. I will just name a few, but I will send you some more detailed data because we have database which I will need to look through. We've been working in Canada with involvement of a few Canadian organizations, including the CAN Canada and many others. And the latest, we've been planning to have a meeting with Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, who is she has Ukrainian roots, but she is also very much pro fossil fuels, and we wanted to talk to her of how to phase out in Canada and stop, just as you said exactly, just trying to get into the Russian share and split it between a few other power holding countries. Among them, there are Manulife Financial, there are Sun Life Financial, there are these are like really wide institutions which you might not have heard. Because I didn't before we started analyzing them with partners. Is Scotia Bank still? It's Fiera Capital. There are a few more which BMO Financial Group and many others, AGF Management. These are mainly asset managers, financials. You see there is a different range of them. And if you would like to, we could try and have and organize a conversation, a chat with those whom we got involved already into the conversations with Chrystia Freeland and try to, and there are more organizations who signed the Stand With Ukraine campaign. We have contacts with them and we can try to connect you to keep doing a great work in international solidarity and cutting the financial supply of Russia's war machine. Answering the second question is, I can share my email in the chat after I answer questions. So please feel free to contact me if you just feel the necessity or you see some points when we can collaborate and when we can amplify our joint call for phasing out fossil fuels, and which is interconnected, of course, with fight in fossil fuels capitalism. And the second, what I would like to respond is quite tough one because it's about nuclear, and but I will respond to this. And we have our official position is Razum We Stand on our website. And I am a Chernobyl child when actually Chernobyl exploded. I've been 7 years old. And what I know for sure is that I will have problems with the cancer after for my 45 or so, because there is proven research proving the interconnection between the Chernobyl nuclear explosion and the health issues with the children who were between 7 and 10 at the time when the Chernobyl exploded. So we see one thing why we can't support nuclears. It's a direct harm that it causes to environment and to human health and human life, even if it's so kind of CO2 friendly, it's lower emissions, but a huge hazard on the other side of the chain. And what actually these issues are outside of my main work area because I am anti-fossil fuel activist and climate activist. So I'm not just really into nuclear work, but we have our partners working on that. And what we can say that the only reason that nuclear energy has made profit for private nuclear energy company investors is that public subsidies have been shaped to cover all external costs, and nation states have played the role of private insurers covering all risks. That's why but that's why nuclear is still going. And even Ukraine, I know what you probably mean, because Ukraine used to get 63% or so of their energy supply, energy generation from nuclear power stations, but it's not efficient to keep them any longer. As we saw, some Zaporizhia power station is still seized by Russian troops, and we don't know. At the very first weeks of the war, we had real risk of explosions on these Zaporizhia power plants, and we are still unsure that the weapon of mass destruction that nuclear weapons were will be activated against Ukrainians and against all of us. And I would like just to continue this thought with a very simple sentence. I told it many times, and it even became really captured everywhere in media, but that fossil fuels have also become weapons of mass destruction, and we can't keep them as exactly as nuclear energies, even for energy production. We must secure ourselves and generations that will come to replace us, and to live in better environment, and nuclear is not a part of the plan. I know that many lobbyists, and we actually were against, a big part of our campaigning was to just against the keeping gas and nuclear in the EU taxonomy, green taxonomy, among the green activities. Unfortunately, nuclear lobby was able to reach out to our Minister of Energy, who is a former chief of nuclear, of the biggest nuclear state company in Ukraine, and he just sent a letter to EU parliamentarians, to EU MPs, saying no, nuclear is really good. We are not supporting gas, but we don't want gas and nuclear to be a transition fuel, none one of them, and we must get rid of gas and nuclear, and not to prolong their life for transition. And so that's an answer. And answering next question, how did they felt, and if I did felt the support and solidarity of environmental movement? Without any doubt, undoubtedly, yes. We're so grateful for the solidarity of a climate movement, especially an environmental movement. And people are doing incredible things, being on the other side of the world, and they are doing this in solidarity with us. And because they understand that fighting fossil fuel dictatorships should be done by us all together, because it's all interconnected. We won't be able to save our environment. Just bringing one example about Ukraine, 1/3 of our national protected areas has been destroyed, and the damage to environment is huge. And as an environmental lawyer, I know that it's very hard to assess this damage and to compensate for this damage, but we will make Russia compensate this damage in the way. But environment is not the thing that you can compensate just like this overnight, because you need trees to grow, you need land and water to be cleaned off, and this takes time. But environmental movement are great friends, and I can name hundreds of organizations who supported the Stand with Ukraine and who are reaching out to us to help. And I'm really grateful. And we with Ukrainians, because there are much many people on behind me, who are in the Stand with Ukraine campaign and who support our work, we all are grateful, because we are the power when we are together. And even the name of the organization I've chosen, it's Razom. Razom in Ukrainian means together. Together we stand, and together we will withstand, I believe, as well. And please remind me, what was the last question, because I didn't but I'm really happy to answer everything, and I can provide my contacts with the groups whom I have, responding to your question, John. I can do that absolutely with the contacts I have across the US.
Thanks very much, Svitlana. Is there any further questions or comments? Cheryl?
Well, my question just had to do with the effectiveness of sanctions and embargoes. And yeah, okay.
Yes, that's a very good question. That's a perfect question. Thank you so much, Cheryl. and for being in the fight as well. Yes, you are very right saying that when we see sanctions imposed, we see loopholes in those sanctions immediately. And for example, what we've been doing before the Christmas Christmas break happened, because if we want it or not, people went to some breaks, and in Europe especially, and in European Parliament. But we were really pressuring on them, on MPs, and on some specific certain countries who played a role in the European Parliament. And we wanted them to close these loopholes, as it still allow 32% of vessels who carry Russian oil to the third countries are being registered within the EU, and EU did nothing about that. And the second, about 74% of insurers who provide the insurance for those vessels are also being registered in Norway and partially in European Union, and they did nothing about that. And the same thing happened, but at less scale, because US is not a major importer of, and it has not been. They imposed embargo, and they follow this embargo of Russian oil and gas to less extent. And but there are still loopholes on the secondary sanctions that allow these imports still happen and flow in a hidden way. And oil price cap and gas price cap. There are other things that we've got while we've been fighting towards embargo. But of course, the toll of that, it's too high. We wanted 25, and our government wanted $25 per barrel, but not 60, which still allows to get some profit to Putin. So our way is to make like more pressure and to cut those prices. And you are very right, of course, this industry is profiting on that. It always has been the same. And actually, just saying about the one message overall, that in the past years, fossil fuels were a primary driver of colonialization, militarization, violence, and conflict globally. And the rise of the military-industrial complex was driven in the large part by fossil fuels. And this is what we see happening now. But at the same time, I just wanted to bring one other side of that. As an affected person, as a person who lives in a country of the war, we've got, I don't remember when was it exactly, but some European activists wrote a letter, very peaceful letter, and saying, okay, stop all military supply to Ukraine, because of course it's not about peace, it's not about things. What I wanted to tell those people, and I told them this informally, oh yes, your letter is very right, but please deliver it to the east of our country. Deliver it, try and dare, and deliver this letter to Russian troops who are torturing and raping our women and children, even just newborn. Can you imagine this awfulness of what is happening? And the mass graves, there are over 400 mass graves with hundreds of people. And it would be my response. I'm climate activist. I'm not about military. I'm not about just fighting someone with a gun, but just please, if you just really think of that, come to Ukraine and deliver this to Putin directly, or come to Russia if you dare. Where just, I don't know if someone has seen these pictures from the center of Russia, of Moscow, how they celebrate their holidays with police, full packed with police, with vans, and no people over there. So is anyone ever there? And those parents who are losing their children on this side, and who got their children, beloved children, in the coffins every day, and they have to deal with this somehow. I just really want those people to come, and I'm just really ready to organize this trip if they would like to. So, and after that, I got no response from them, but I got no letters like this as well, because it's not fair. It's not fair, and every sovereign nation has a right to protect themselves. And So that just to give you a brief outline of what we think of those messages when people who are sitting on the other side of the world are completely safe, having electricity and power and not being physically unsafe and under even small danger or in other countries, and saying that that yes, you have to stop. Yes, so, but I'm really sorry that it's happening, and I hope that the war will end quite soon. We are working day and night for that, but it's not easy to fight the fossil fuel dictatorship. As I said, they were doing well for many years. They have got a lot of political lobbyists on every levels of the power and financial institutions. But actually, to speaking about financial institutions, even a BlackRock and some others that you might know, they just said when we were campaigning against the gas and nuclear in the EU taxonomy, they said that they truly recognize that fossil fuels cannot be an object for a long time investments, because everyone, I think, understands it now that it will be a stranded asset as nuclear power plants build, which they need 30 years to build and to be able to get profit, as LNG terminals that they will need a decade, and these investments will be locked into them after we will switch to renewables, and yeah, many others. But thank you so much for your questions, because it really made me alive and saying and wanted to fight even more and try to get more people in. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Svitlana. So Marianne and or Eric, and then I have a comment, and then maybe we can wrap it up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a quick question. One of the things that I thought was interesting was that early in the war, the International Energy Agency made an urgent appeal to countries, particularly wealthy countries like Canada and the United States, to do short-term oil conservation measures, including reducing speed limits as was done in the 1973 oil crisis. And this was completely ignored in Canada. I don't know if anybody paid any attention in the United States at all, but this was ignored by the Canadian government and the Canadian climate movement for the most part. And I'm wondering if you think this is an important thing and something that we should be pushing for in Canada.
Absolutely. I'm very well familiar, and I know Fatih Birol. I organized with him once, and I know he's like senior advisor. I have good connections with them, and I hope to get them involved into because they were not much involved into rebuilding Ukraine in green, but now we would like to involve them as well. And this 10-step plan, reducing the oil demand and oil dependency, and the corresponding gas plan, are very simple actually, and the government could implement it very quickly. But why did not they do it in Europe as well? None of the countries did that. Maybe France a bit, but or Germany started. But can you imagine just those politicians who will have elections in a few years, how they actually implement those plans and tell those people, oh, you can drive 70 kilometers per hour being on a high autobahn, but not have your regular 300 per kilometers, or I don't know how many miles, it's much less per hour. How they can tell it, or how they can limit the parking in the city center or driving through the city center, or just how they can push for a car sharing or just using public transportation. Germany did a good try with a €9 ticket, and I've been able, when I've been to J7, to use this ticket, and people take it quite good. So what it means that if you could demand from state to look into that direction, because there's a very specific but very concrete steps that are quite easy to campaign for, because they are very visible and everyone knows, but they also require a lot of canvassing work, just knocking into the doors, persuading people that when you say no to the high speed or levels, or when you will use public transportation, it will be much better than and I know that it's hard to do because Canada is highly dependent on a car connection, and it's not always possible. So you need to think of the ways how you can do that. But I believe that how we change the individual consumption as well of oil and gas will bring us faster towards the win. And we have to work with different stakeholders. And you are very right saying that and mentioning about this plan, because that's how we could save millions of barrels per day being spent and being bought from and being actually explored. Yes.
Thanks, Svitlana. So I see Mary wants to make a comment, and I think Cheryl had an announcement she wanted to make, and then I'd like to make one final comment, and maybe we can wrap it up after that. Oh, Mudassir also. So if anybody wants to speak, please raise your hands now, and because I think we're getting towards, where we need to wrap the meeting up. So, okay, we have Mary, Mudassir, and then Cheryl, if you have an announcement, and then I'd like to make one final comment. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks very much, Svitlana. This is amazing stuff. Such power in all this information you're bringing us. Just because I'm in Germany, I'm in Berlin, I'm Irish, but I'm Berlin. The €9 ticket was said to save as much CO2 as a year of speed limit, because Germany doesn't have one. People can still race along the motorways at any tempo they want. It's one of the few countries that doesn't have it. They had 3 months did that.
Yep.
It's going nowhere. We can't do anything with it. Obviously, the whole climate movement demands that should continue, and it's not being done. And of course, the other thing that's needed is investment in rail transport. Investment in public transport would be absolutely vital. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So it was a short token to try and say the government is doing something different, whereas this government is actually buying into dictatorship, oil and gas, fracking and worse in UAE, in Qatar, and so on. And it's still the question then, how do we get there? A country like Germany should be making vast investments in a green transition. It's actually going completely the other direction. And I'd love to hear your comments on that, Svitlana. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mary. Mudassir, if you have a brief comment.
Ma'am, did you get my question actually? I think you didn't. My question, that's what I wanted to ask. My question.
Oh, okay. Would you like to restate your question, please?
No, basically what I was asking is the presentation was good. What my question firstly was that what about, ma'am said that we have to ask the countries to reduce dependency. Isn't firstly, how are we going to defeat the Russian oil cartel? Because what I heard from other sources and things like that, because I was checking their Twitter accounts, that Russia is still benefiting from cheap oil that they are supplying to other countries, that is mainly to India, and they have a good profit on that. That was my question, but I didn't raise it the first time. And the second question is, how are we going to defeat these Total and Shell? Because they were the ones who invested firstly in Russia, because there was a good case of Mikhail Khodorkovsky and things like that. It won't get into the details, and that's the second question. And thirdly is what is the future for Ukraine environmentalism? I heard that in battlefronts they are using green energy, but is Ukraine doing good on the environmental spectrum, or is it just the same as Russia? Thank you very much. Hope you got it.
Thank you, Mudassir. Cheryl, you were going to make an announcement.
Yeah, I put, well, there's two things that have been put in the chat. One was a link to a call for solidarity actions with the Russian anti-war movement that has been made by Ilya Budraitsis and the Russian socialist movement. And I just feel so strongly that everybody who can do something, anything, there is no action that is too small, in my opinion, to bring this to the public's attention, that there are people in Russia who have sacrificed their lives, their livelihoods, everything imaginable to try to stop Putin and to oppose Putin even before the invasion of Ukraine. So anyhow, they're calling for a week of solidarity actions. Even two people on a corner with photographs of some of the people who have, in Russia. I think is important. So we are organizing something here in the East Bay, in the San Francisco Bay Area for January 21st. If you're interested, you can send us an email or something. The second one is also, again, we're coming up to the 1-year anniversary of the invasion, February 24th, and there's international activities, demonstrations, and different things being organized for that week of February 24th. And we are planning events here in the United States, and I hope that some of you will be able to join us. We'll be posting more about that on our various social media. And also the Ukraine Solidarity Network that is present here with Bill Young, and Howie and others. Thank you so much, Svitlana. Thank you for your presentation and your courage. It's very much appreciated. We'll be following you.
Thanks, Cheryl. I'd like to make one final point, and that is we can really see in this discussion how all the different issues and struggles around in different countries are being linked together. For instance, the struggle against the coup in Myanmar and how that's linked with the struggle against the Russia's invasion. And also we have the issue of Syria with Russia, supporting that brutal dictator Assad, or with Putin supporting him, in part because he wants to keep that port there that Russia has access to. And that is, I think, directly linked with the question of the oil and gas industry. But also, there's a whole other side to this, and that is, like Svitlana was explaining to us about different environmental groups and throughout the world, really, that are involved in support for Ukraine. And so far, we have not had the contact with them that we would like to have, that I think would make that struggle very much stronger. And I think that's very important, because we've heard Svitlana mention that one so-called peace group, that really what they're for is the peace of the graveyard. Cut off all means for Ukraine to defend itself. And groups like that are quite prevalent, unfortunately, in the so-called peace movement and also in the socialist movement. And they have said that they want to start to make links with the environmentalists and basically to provide a political cover for Putin. And so I think that linking up ourselves as socialists and others on the left, linking up, with the environmentalist groups is very, very important to cut that off. And I would just like to say, also in conclusion, our main contacts here in the United States, and also I believe in Europe, our main contacts within Ukraine has been with social movement, which is composed, as I understand it, mainly of unionists, of socialists, anarchists, and others on the left. And so I'm just wondering, Svitlana, what kind of links you have with social movement, and if it's not advisable for for yourselves in the environmental movement and social movement to link up. So with that, I think this has been a very successful meeting, both for political but also for practical purposes. And Svitlana, if you want to conclude with any final remarks.
Yes, I will just try to be short. Thank you so much, everyone who attended and who brought their contribution and heart and passion towards the fight in Russia and Putin and fossil-fueled wars they wage against us. Just saying and summarizing that keeping the world dependent on fossil fuels will always prop up dictators and human rights abusers. You rightly mentioned about Myanmar and Syria, and there are a range of other countries, and there is Yemen, there was Namibia. There are many, many others who suffer for many years with the wars caused by fossil fuel dictatorship. Not always that visible, not always at large as Russia is, but still. the more global demand there is for oil and gas, the easier it's for dictators like Putin to profit and grow their armies. I think we all have witnessed what they could let us. And it's extremely tough for me as Ukrainian to see what's the price that we are paying for that. And excuse me, Cheryl, but for me, there are no good Russians. Before the war, I had many friends, who live there, but there are no good Russians that allow these dictatorships to happen and to attack us for so many years, so many months and months. I just got recently, while we've been speaking, I've got 2 notifications. The 2 people whom I knew were just killed. They were alive yesterday, but they are not alive right now. So that's why I am really subjective charging on what could be done, and I just call in on us to act faster and to try to help and stay in solidarity with Ukraine and really stand with Ukraine, because as you said during the meeting, where someone said it's very important point that we need to change. We need to change the status quo, and we need to end fossil fuel dictatorship forever, and otherwise that peace won't be impossible, because the war in Ukraine affects not only Ukrainians directly, but also some other countries. And I don't think that we want these times to come back with, and actually, as long as we are addicted to fossil fuels, we will continue to empower dictators like Putin to launch devastating wars and terrorize their own people. And the best way to reduce Russia's power is to get off oil and gas, and that's how we'll be able to fight the fossil fuels everywhere in the world. It does not matter what country they are. Just responding to a few questions, I did not want to left it unresponded about yes, Ukraine really aims, and Ukrainian civil society, many networks, organizations, and people are really looking forward to rebuild Ukrainian green, and we are campaigning hard inside of the country as well, not just outside. Just really get our government in these really extremely tough circumstances to think about the climate crisis and to think about not relying on fossil fuels anymore. And we've got success into this path, and we are collaborating with some governmental officials as well, how to build the most resilient plan to rebuild Ukrainian green, because no one wants to be like Russia. And we also, as Ukraine, we won't come back to our Soviet past, never, and for any price. And that's why I believe we will be able to win and defeat Putin and Russia all together. And the new life, a new era of inclusive green economy based on renewables will be really achievable and affordable for all of us. And we won't need to pay with the human lives for this anymore. Thank you so much for your attention and for being with us on Sunday. I hope you will all have a good day, but please stay in touch and just let's just really campaign together and stay in solidarity, first with Ukraine, but also with all other countries who suffer from fossil fuel dictatorship and the wars and conflicts.